Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack.
You know who I can do without? I can do without the people in the video store.
Which ones?
All of them. They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
And now, on with the show.
I'm Jack Death. I'm a trooper in the 23rd century.
Jack Death, Angel City PD. May I see your stats?
What did I do?
Under Section 7 of the Penal Code, the Council authorized me to administer you a Trancers suspect examination.
You can't give me a TSE without a warrant.
I got your warrant right here, pal.
Okay. I don't want any trouble.
Hold that.
My job is hunting Trancers.
I got nothing to hide.
Finding them, and singeing them.
Look out!
My name's Jack Death. I am a Trancer hunter from the 21st century. It's been 7 years since I went down the line to old California. Life's been good. I thought I'd singe my last Trancer, but nothing lasts forever.
Vacation's over, Jack. Time to get off your butt and go back to work.
Rabbit, listen to me. I need your help. I'm a special agent on a mission from the future.
Who I think you are?
Stillwell, Alice B.
Welcome to old California, Alice. I'm your husband, Jack Death.
Oh my God, Jack, it is you. The only man I ever had sex with.
Isn't that bad?
He's a Trancer hunter, stranded in our century, out of enemies.
That's right, folks. It's time to take advantage of our holiday raids at Jack Death's detective agency.
Out of luck.
I thought we agreed on a clean break.
This is the greatest Christmas present I've ever had.
And out of time.
Where is Jack Death? Where is Jack Death?
But now, Jack Death is going back to the future to take care of old business.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net's Loose Cannon. And I'm not alone as we browse the aisles of the Twig video stores. We usually check out some movies that may have been huge back in the day, maybe cult classics, or just crap that we want to talk about. I am one of your hosts today, one of the video store clerks. I am Mike the Birdman, but I'm not alone on this show. I'm bringing in Twig Video Store Regional Manager, the co-host of Do You Even Movie from the lovely city that sometimes is known as the Paris of Ohio.
David Denoyer, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right, guys. We are back here on Loose Cannon. The last time you heard from us, we talked about the Wishmaster series, which has led us to yet another idea that we're going to be doing in just probably couple of weeks from when you hear this episode, if not sooner. So we will tease that at the end of the show. But let's just say it involves a genie, and it's not something I thought we would cover on this show, but I'm totally fine with it.
I mean, there is a hint in the Wishmaster episode, which is why I called you, spontaneously and was just like, hey, was listening to this and we got to do that.
Yeah, so I'm like, all right. By the way, this phone call came at like 1 a.m, and then we yip-yapped for like an hour. So totally cool. So in this episode of the show, we're gonna talk about, oddly enough, one of my former employers and one of a very interesting summer job that I really didn't have to do a whole lot, but I still had fun doing. We're gonna be talking about a series of movies. We're going to talk about the first 3 today, and it comes from Full Moon Entertainment, though at that time it was Empire Pictures. We're going to be talking about the Trancers series with Jack Death himself, Tim Thomerson. And this is a series of movies I've always wanted to talk about on Twig at some point. I may have at some point, but definitely not in depth, definitely not at this length. And I'm just excited to talk about this because me and Dave were looking for ideas for shows. And I think this is just one of the ones we just randomly just spitballed. And I was like, holy shit, we got to do this. And you're like, I would like to do this very much so.
Yeah. Well, and the hilarious part of it is, if you remember, we've been putting this off for a little bit because my availability of them, wasn't super easy from what I was going off of, which was the IMDb app and Letterboxd app. And then lo and behold, after I borrow our good buddy Enrique's copy of the Squid Pack, the now out of print Squid Pack that is 1 through 3 that you can't get anymore in a combo. I don't know what happened. I don't know if they pulled it for some reason or whatnot, but you cannot find it on Amazon. 1 through 6 get fucking dropped on Amazon Prime here in the US. So, it's just kind of funny that way that I go from not being able to get my hands on them or 1 and 2 to 1 through 6 are now at my fingertips readily available.
Someone came down the line and was like, we need to make this happen. So, as we often do here on the show, we usually talk about our history with these movies. And mine goes all the way back to high school, and that would be in the mid to late 90s for me. And I remember crystal clear how I fell into these movies, specifically Trancers 2 and 3. But the first Trancers, there used to be a video store near my high school, and I remember it being run by or owned by one of my high school teachers. I can't remember her name, but I remember her daughter was really cute and she was really nice. And we used to have like a history class together. Mrs. Rao, I think her name was. And her daughter used to work at the video store. And if I remember this correctly, I remember browsing in there. And this video store, clearly they were dorks who owned this place. And I remember just going through the sci-fi and the horror section because they were on the right side of the video store. Because I was a horny teenager, it was right near the adult section. So if I peeked my head just right, I could see into the curtained back room.
Oh, yes.
But I remember the Trancers cover because it's the classic one where it's got Jack Death, aka Tim Thomerson, in the Judge Dredd helmet with the big visor and everything, and he's holding that laser pistol, and it just said the name Trancers on it. I'm thinking, well, this looks kind of cool. I don't know what this is. And that's when I used to take a lot of risks with movies. I've become a lot more open to that again as I've gotten older, as I've entered the I don't give a shit phase of my life. I just want to try interesting stuff. And thanks to people like you, you, Enrique, Alex, Aaron, I'm willing to try almost anything. So I started watching this movie. I'm thinking, wow, this is really friggin' cool. And at that time, when I saw Trancers, Helen Hunt was on television. She was doing Mad About You. Twisters had come out within the last year or two. And for years, I thought this was her first movie. But when I listened to you and Enrique talk about Twister sometime this last summer, and I found out her career goes all the way back to the beginning of the 1970s or late 1960s, I was like, wow, I had no idea. And again, I only ever knew her from Mad About You and Twister. So to see her still bring that same fun and charisma to this, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. I know you. And then just seeing Tim Thomerson play this future cop, this swaggery detective noir style character. And this is where I remember distinctly falling in love with B movies. And this made me a Full Moon Entertainment fan for most of the 1990s and into the early 2000s, where I would watch anything that had the Full Moon banner on it. And I actually remember getting part of my first gig when I graduated PR school in early 2010, in April or May of that year. I was looking for gigs, and I can't remember precisely how it happened, but I think I contacted I remember this. So I had contacted Charles Band for, he was the director of this, I think. And I'd contacted him for a project during college. And I had kept in contact with Charlie, and I can't remember precisely how it came about, but he asked me, like, hey, I need to do some radio appearances for my freak show or whatever it was called. Could you set me up with a couple? I'm going to be in these cities over the next few months. Could you make it happen? I'm like, yeah, all right, sure. And I remember that summer, he asked me, well, what do you want in terms of payment? So we negotiated my contract fee. And I had asked, hey, can I get some full moon movies? And he's like, yeah, sure. So one of the things he sent me was this giant ass box set of Trancers 1 to 6. At the time, I think I got, I didn't get the giant Puppet Master Blu-ray set. I asked for it, but I didn't get it. But I got it was like a Full Moon Classics box set. So I think I've got like Bad Channels and Seed People and Arcade. I'm gonna actually look through my like DVDs after the show here, because I had to watch Trancers 3 on my disc because the copy I had on my computer digitally is way out of sync.
Yeah.
But yeah, so finally, to bring this story to a conclusion, years ago, when I was in Los Angeles briefly, I was attending the 2009 Spike TV Video Game Awards, and the afternoon of the award show, I had to go down to Charlie Band's office in LA, which was not in a great part of town, by the way. I remember specifically my ride, who was with the other outlet that I was hanging out with Handsome Tom of thegameheroes.com, formerly of screwattack.com. He's like, hey, Mike, could you not leave me out here for too long? I kind of don't want to get stabbed. I'm like, yeah. So I go upstairs to Charlie Band's office, and it's in this like warehouse like thing, and there are props everywhere when I walk in, and it was cool. I think I saw the like evil bong sitting on like a shelf or something. I'm pretty sure I saw part of like a full moon costume. I think it was like the Ginger Dead Man or something. And I just remember thinking, holy shit, I'm actually in a fucking Hollywood office. This is cool. Admittedly, one of the weirdest places I've ever been, but it was so cool. So I got paid, and I know that's a thing that doesn't happen too often with this person, but yeah. I got paid, and it was pretty cool. And I remember walking out of the office when I got paid thinking, wow, I just got to work for the Trancers guy for a summer. Cool. And yeah, so that is my brief history with the Trancers franchise. What about you, Dave?
So I tragically missed, I think, a prime point of this to be a part of my life, because I was talking to Enrique about this on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I went through a phase where I would get all of those collections, I think, that were through Echo Bridge, like the 6 movie collections that were like mixed up bags of horror, and the Puppet Master collection and all this stuff. And I remember distinctly that one time I was working at the mall, and somebody had brought in some stuff to trade into FYE, and one of the titles was Trancers 2. So I'm in college by this point. I've heard about the Trancers movies, but I've never actually seen any of them. And Trancers 2 comes in, and I'm looking at this, and I'm just like, this looks wild. Like Richard Lynch, Jeffrey Combs, like, I mean, like who like, this movie says stacked cast. So I remember I bought it, like, and I think at that point with my discount, it was like, I think like a measly $4 for the old Full Moon DVD. So I bought Trancers 2, took it home, and I remember, I think I watched it with my roommates, and it was hilarious because I got to just watch their heads explode seeing a Full Moon movie for the first time. Because I think I had seen, I can't even remember. I know I had seen some other ones before, but distinctly Trancers, that was like the first, that was my first introduction to it too. Fast forward 2020, we're into COVID, and I'm looking for something to watch, and I can't remember. I think they were all on Prime, I want to say. but I'm not 100% sure. And I remember I ended up watching 1 through 4, and that's really the extent of them. I don't really have much backlog onto them, but they've been talked about a lot in my life, and people. I mean, Enrique's a fan of it, but overall, yeah, like I honestly have no idea why I didn't get to these sooner, and I'm kind of heartbroken I didn't.
Yeah, like it is such a fun series. Like to me, the Trancers movies represent what a B movie series has the capacity to be when the idea is smart. It's kind of a fun idea. It doesn't have like a AAA budget like anything from like a James Cameron. It doesn't have a major star attached to it. It's a movie clearly made with love, clearly made with like popsicle sticks, duct tape, and interns that are working very hard for very, very, very little.
Yeah.
And it's what
definitely
really
that last one.
Oh yeah, and that's what made me appreciate B movies as kind of an art form, and it made me less of a film snob because, in high school, what the fuck do I know? Because I was like, oh man, this didn't have a $30-40 million budget or whatever. I didn't know any better. I'd never seen anything like that. And this is what very much generated my love of low budget horror movies, but also just because it doesn't have Arnold Schwarzenegger or Meg Ryan or I don't know, any of the major stars at the time, doesn't mean you're not going to get a quality flick. And watching Trancers and rewatching it again with my best friend Liam the other day, who used to play on our actual play podcast when we played Stargate SG-1. We love just watching movies together. Like he's my movie buddy besides Alex whenever he gets a chance to come over. And it was fun just to re-experience this stuff. And like me and him all week have been saying dry hairs for squids and just this amazingly fun time. So I guess let's break into Trancers 1. And I got some interesting thoughts about this movie. So Dave, hit me with the pertinent deets.
All right, so pertinent deets, we are talking about Trancers from 1984, rated PG-13, 1 hour and 16 minutes, which I cannot argue with that runtime. And Trancers, according to IMDb, is the story of a gruff bounty hunter travels back in time in the 1980s Los Angeles to stop a twisted criminal who can transform people into zombie-like creatures. This film is directed by Charles Band, who is, the man behind Full Moon. He has given us such films as the Puppet Master series. I mean, he's directed countless movies, produced countless movies. But I do want to bring attention to two other people, as I normally do on Do Even Movie. So our two writers on this are Danny Bilson and Paul DeMaio, and they both went to a lot of work on some Full Moon screenplays. But one thing I do want to point out, looking over their resumes, is they also have several movies of note, including Eliminators from 1986 and Arena from 89, which are Empire Pictures, of course. But then as we go up into their resume, they have responsibility for 007 Agent Under Fire, 007 Nightfire, 007 Everything or Nothing, GoldenEye Rogue Agent, Darksiders, Company of Heroes. So they've also done some video game work. And I want to make that first and foremost my thought of Trancers as a series in a whole. These needed video games so bad.
Trancers would be, if at the time, if Charlie Band had been smart, he could have easily made an early 1990s era FMV game, the sort of thing you'd see on the Sega Saturn or like the TurboGrafx system. Like, I really think Trancers would benefit well from that format, like the point and click adventure. Tim Thomerson would have done it. You could have easily gotten Art LaFleur to come back, Thelma Thompson. You could have got Helen Hunt to do like a VO cameo if you didn't want to have her character in it. But I imagine she probably would have, because you could probably shoot one of these things super, super easy and probably super, super quick because it's a video game. It's just shooting a lot of B-roll and just having Tim record his voice and having the odd reaction shot. In fact, I never even thought about turning this into a video game. Like when we come to the end of the show, what we want to see done with the Trancers franchise, and I never even considered a game. So we'll come back to this in just a little bit, but please continue.
So also bringing up into who shot Trancers by the name of Mac Ahlberg, and you may think, hey, I know that name, but I don't know why. Well, that's because he has shot films such as 1981's Hell Night with Linda Blair, The Seduction, Parasite, My Tutor, Chained Heat, Metal Storm, The Dungeon Master, Ghost Warrior, Ghoulies, Trancers, Reanimator, House, Eliminators from Beyond, Dolls, House 2, Prison, Ghost Town, Pulse Pounders, Deep Star 6, Arena, House 3, Double Your Pleasure, Robot Jocks. I mean, the man's resume goes all the way up into titles like Innocent Blood, My Boyfriend's Back, Beverly Hills Cop 3, The Brady Bunch movie in 95, and a Very Brady sequel in 96, Space Truckers, Good Burger. I mean, you're talking about a person behind the camera that both worked, but also worked on incredible titles. King of the Ants in 2003, for one, for that matter. I mean, Mac Ahlberg is a name in cinematography that you know if you are a film fan, even if you don't realize there's so many works that they've done. But I think what, first and foremost, Trancers would not work without is Tim Thomerson. And I think we should just go ahead and get that right off the bat. Jack Death is a character that can only exist in these movies because it's Drake and I, my buddy Drake and I were talking about this. It's like the lore of Trancers changes every fucking movie.
Yeah, it's very inconsistent movie to movie, and I guess we can kind of chat about this now. So I'm watching this last night with like Liam, and how Trancers works in a way, just to set up the lore for you. And Dave will get this into the plot, but I'm going to explain it in my overly analytical nerd brain.
Yeah.
So there's a guy named Whistler, and he's able to use mental abilities to transform weak-minded people into things known as Trancers, people that are enhanced through some capability to become zombie-like, but they also gain enhanced strength, enhanced aggression, in some cases, limited regeneration abilities and other powers. And in the future, it's said that Whistler, the guy who is in charge of these creatures, decides to escape the 23rd century and time travels. But this is something very unique that I hadn't seen up until this point, and it's something speaking of video games, they kind of do, in a sense, in the Assassin's Creed video games, where you're able to time travel, but you're only able to do so by going through your bloodline to an ancestor who happens to be alive in that particular time period. Now, this rule is immediately changed in number 2, where they introduce a piece of tech that can travel with them.
Yeah.
But then they change the rule again later on in the series, where they start using the serum, which is how they are able to reprogram how to send your mind back through time. And it can even be hyper specific in a piece of Trancers media that was thought lost for decades, but was restored back in 2013, called Trancers City of Lost Angels, which is kind of a
1.5. It's basically Trancers 1.5 going between Trancers and Trancers 2, which, I mean, how could you not?
Yeah, and it's honestly kind of a neat idea, but like, so some of the technology that enables you to go down the line, they also give other pieces of tech that go down with you. There's something known as the long second watch, which basically stretches 1 second into 10, but it's only able to be used once. And I don't know how they send tech down the line, but it's just there when you arrive. And it's not unlike the Terminator, where they can send your mind back through time, but they can send objects, which is, whereas in Terminator, they can send objects, but they have to be coated in flesh because nothing dead will go through. But here, just the way it is. So when you arrive back at your predetermined time period or whatever, you arrive in an ancestor's body. It could be a man, could be a woman, it could be whatever. But for all intents and purposes, from what I can tell, the mind of the person you go into is suppressed.
Yeah.
Which makes me a whole lot of questions come up from this. Because you're not exactly murdering somebody, you're suppressing their mind. I don't know how much they're in the back seat of you taking over their body. Are they working in concert? Are they passive? Are they asleep? This question will really come up in Trancers Part 6 when we get there in like a couple shows.
I think it's very, very important of us as stewards to the Trancers series right now with this episode that we be very upfront that in the fact that you do not want to question Trancers lore, because if you do, you're going to unwind the entire series like you're pulling away a thread. There is no cohesion really in these series, but at the same time you don't mind it because the movies themselves are so fucking fun. They're batshit, but on top of all of that, they work. Even with the minimal plot development, I mean, or maybe overthought plot development is the word on that. But even with the plot that we are given in all three of the movies that we're going to discuss today, Trancers especially, just you can't help but really enjoy yourself even if the movie's really not that good. And I mean, it's you get a taste of like a freaking a detective noir film mixed with an 80s action movie mixed with a sci-fi, like, I mean, this movie is wild. These series are wild, but the shit that goes down in these movies and the plots that they try to build and the characters that we're introduced to and the conflict that we get introduced to in these first three movies, you cannot, and I mean this wholeheartedly, you cannot question a lot of things because you will just start putting yourself into a circle of, all right, so if this means this, then if this means this, then why was Jack able to do this in part 2, but then part 3 he was, but okay, and Lena, if Lena knew this, but that doesn't know that, like, it's just, you will put yourself into a whirlwind of questions, and then you won't be able to enjoy these fine films.
See, but one of the things I love about the Trancers movies, as I talk about how the tech works and yet doesn't work at the same time, they do so much world building. And they do it with small lines of dialogue. Like there's one line that literally happens in the first minute of the movie. And then we're going to talk about the actual kind of plot here. But Jack is doing a voiceover over the main credits. And he's talking about how he hunts Trancers. And he's finally singed, aka destroyed, Whistler. He singed him on one of the outer colonies, and basically, so that establishes
this movie. The terms in this movie.
Oh yeah, but that little line establishes space travel is widely available. It's commercialized to some capacity, and there's even another line of dialogue where they talk about Whistler, who's potentially run, and they think he's hiding in the ruins of old Los Angeles. And just a simple line is like, well, fine, then we'll take the submarine fleet and just blow them out of the water. Which again, world building, which means at some point between 1985 when the movie happens to 2270 something, I think, when this happens, the big earthquake has happened. Earth has changed in that time. And they even consistently update what's happening in the background. This is something I didn't really notice until Trancers 3 and 4. The world's advancing. And it was just something like a throwaway line. You didn't have to go that hard, but you did, because you kept littering in Easter eggs that showing something's going to happen in this world. And it's just little things like that really make the Trancers world so much bigger, which again, when we talk about what we want for the future of this franchise, leads a lot to the imagination, where someone, if they're clever, could really make a go of this series. In fact, there was an interview that Charlie Band did with Joe Blow back in 2023 talking about the future of this series, but we will get there. So Dave, continue on.
So what I absolutely love about the first Trancers movie is the first 5 minutes. And I do not mean, because everybody can say like, oh, the first 5 minutes are great. No, like I think it's literally the first 5 minutes of this movie where you get a feel for the rest of this series, because Trancers is in the Full Moon catalog, which means for one thing, it's going to be short. And I'm not a huge Full Moon fan. Like there's movies in there that I do enjoy. I'm a Blood Dolls fan through and through, and Puppet Master series too. I've gotten a little bit back into those, but Full Moon for the most part for me was Ginger Dead Man, Killjoy, and like a couple mixed in there. But what I forget about that is Empire Pictures and then Full Moon in the late 80s into the end of the 90s is some primo fucking stuff. And Trancers being 84 with Empire, it has that feeling of an Empire Pictures film, which our first opening of Trancers is we meet Jack Death going into a diner, and we get the idea immediately that he is a space cop. And he is basically scanning this one guy that is sitting at the bar, and then he has one of my favorite lines that you were talking about world building. One of my favorite lines with the waitress, where she's like, what can I get you? And he's like, coffee. And she's like, the real stuff? That'll cost you. And he's like, I think he says I'm worth it, or it's worth it, or something like that. So right then and there, they also are establishing that in the future, goods as far as like coffee and access to food and whatnot have changed drastically, which obviously they do in most post-apocalyptic settings. But that line just in general like gives you kind of a perspective of, okay, we're kind of like in the wasteland of the end time, but there's also this really cool cop guy scanning for people. And then it turns out that that waitress is actually the Trancer and comes at him with a cleaver and starts attacking him and is foaming at the mouth and looks like a thing from Demons. And then gets phased out, then goes in the parking lot, meets Art LaFleur, and we get the sense that Jack Death is kind of a loose cannon cop who doesn't play by his own rules because he's singeing Trancers and he's not supposed to be. So right then and there, you get everything you need from Trancers. A, Jack Death is a cop, a space cop who knows what he's doing. B, Trancers are these demon creatures that can get very violent and become something out of like a early 80s zombie film almost. And C, you have Art LaFleur that knows that Jack's a loose cannon, but he's also still working with him and that there's a problem. Then we go maybe another minute in, and we see Jack swimming in the ocean, except he's talking to us about how he's swimming over the flooded remains of Los Angeles. How in the hell can you not just dive into that world for that hour and 15 minutes and not just eat all this up with a spoon?
And the cool thing about this is, because this movie goes by so quick, and not in a bad way. This is a movie that gives you that full Empire Pictures Full Moon experience. It doesn't waste your time. It's not boring. It's such an incredibly well-paced movie where nothing feels really wasted. You're getting plenty of characterization. You're getting plenty of just world building. And again, it doesn't need a 2-hour runtime. It gives you 76 minutes. This could be something that you could easily flip on, watch, enjoy. And frankly, if you could binge all of these movies in a single day, no problem.
Yeah.
Diminishing returns, but you could definitely binge these movies, and there aren't too many series I can think where you could comfortably do that, because I think maybe one of these movies goes over 90. Maybe.
Maybe. And I think it's like maybe 92 if that. But I mean, for example, 1 and 3 are the same runtime, which are like an hour and 15 to 16 minutes. So I mean, less than 80 minutes for 2 movies, whereas like I think 2 is like 89 minutes. So again, less than 90 minutes. But also, I think it's really pertinent to point out that these movies rely solely on Jack Death as the character, because I mean, without going into looking into the subtitles of all the films, Jack Death is a critical part of all these films. And the fact that you have Tim Thomerson in this role just playing one of the coolest motherfuckers, but also not super good at his job. Like that was kind of the one thing that I was watching on this rewatch. I was just like, Jack Death does get the job done, but he also fucks it up along the way because he's using new stuff, because guess what? They changed the lore again.
Yeah, like he's competent, but he's not the Terminator. He's not like I said, he does make mistakes. He owns those mistakes, but he's also willing to fumble his way through it and somehow end up still looking cool when all is said and done. And that's a thing that very few characters in Hollywood in fiction, I think, do well. When they make mistakes, they're able to cover it up via swagger, like sort of like, I meant to do that. He's not James Bond, but he has all the gadgets of James Bond. But the thing is, with James Bond, he can reuse his fucking laser cutting watch or the car a million times. Jack Death has, when he starts back in 1984, he has a 38 police special, so a very weak handgun for the time. He has the long second watch that can only be used once, and whatever wits he's gathered from a very long career of hunting Trancers, and that's it. So it's mostly skill and luck based with him.
Yeah.
But when he does make mistakes, he's also pretty clever in how he does things. But there are even times Trancers get the drop on him when he should realize, hey, this isn't a great situation. But anyway, continue on.
So then Jack Death, as Birdman says, comes in contact with Whistler, and Whistler is he was a good guy that went rogue, basically, right?
I'm not 100% sure, because that's something about the lore.
Yeah.
I would wonder if the Trancers began as something good, or at least someone had corrupted them, because one of the things I've noticed about these movies, and I'm only going to tease this right now, I wonder if this series shares some DNA with the Terminator, and I don't just mean time travel. This is to, again, put on the, you've put way too much fucking thought into this, Mike, but are Trancers inevitable? Is Jack Death, if we've learned anything from Deadpool and Wolverine and the Marvel Cinematic Universe this last summer, are these things, they have to happen? Is Jack Death an anchor being to the timeline where he has to exist in certain timelines to make certain events happen? Are Trancers an inevitable part of history where if they do not exist at certain times, the timeline goes strange and nothing would progress forward without the intervention of Trancers and Jack Death's involvement? The timeline doesn't proceed the way that it should to get us to where we can travel through time. Events have to happen. And again, with Whistler, I have some theories on him, because he's portrayed as this cult leader who has this army at his beck and call. We find out later there are other people in his family, like, for example, in the second movie, there's a great quote out of Art LaFleur. I love the line though. He's like, when did he get a brother? And again, but anyway, continue.
So Whistler is basically causing trouble, and Art LaFleur talks to Jack Death, and he's McNulty is like, Jack, he's dead. There's nothing we can do. Well, then some time passes. He finds him on the beach. Like I said, he was swimming, and he's like, Whistler's back. He's gone to 1980. We don't know what he's going to do, but we need you to go get him and bring him back. So what we essentially get in the first 10 minutes now is that we get introduced to Jack Death, we get introduced to the scenario, we get introduced to the problem, and we get introduced to basically all your main characters. Because as Jack goes back to 1980, he gets back into the body of a relative that was having a one-night stand with a punk girl that he met at a concert, and it turns out to be Lena, who's played by Helen Hunt. And now Jack Death in this new body has to explain to Lena kind of who he is, but he has to do it subtly. So what's he going to do? He's going to follow her to work, where we have... by the way, it's Christmas time. I forgot to mention that. It's Christmas time, and he follows Lena to work, where she is a helper on a mall Santa set, but it just so happens that the Santa is a Trancer, and while he has a kid on his lap, he throws the kid to the side, turns into a Trancer, and Jack Death has to take care of the Trancer right in front of Lena, and now Lena is kind of believing that there is some crazy shit going on. I don't even know really like how much more of a plot you can explain with Trancers, but basically he tracks down the one relative that hasn't been killed yet, and that ends up being Hap Ashby, who becomes a character through I think all the way to 3, right?
He's mentioned in 3, but he's not on screen.
He's not on screen. Yeah, two's his baseball heyday, which we'll get to. My God. So he ends up protecting Hap, and by this point, we also find out that Whistler has infiltrated the body of a head cop, and that Jack was given these 2 darts to be able to take Whistler back, but also return to their bodies. Unfortunately, one of the darts is broke, so he's got to figure out what he's going to do. Well, they end up catching up to them. He's got a decision to make as to whether he's going to set the guy free that Whistler's body, the Whistler's taken over his body, or stay with Lena, and he ends up, sending Whistler back and staying in the 1980s. So he gives up essentially his job to live happily ever after, but then, Trancers 2's got to come at some point. But one thing I want to also say with Trancers 1 especially is there's really not a lot that happens, but there's also plenty of crazy shit that happens. Like, as far as like the plot goes, it's pretty simple, but also it's not.
Yeah, because like in the future, before Jack gets sent back down the line, they have Whistler's body. They were able to recover it from a Trancers facility. Yeah, and he nukes him. He's like, "Fine, I'm going down the line, but we're doing it my way." And he's like, "Bam!" He's like, "Jack, now we can't try him." I know. So when he runs into that cop, Whistler, as this cop, is like, "Well, Jack, now we can't both go back, and you're not going to murder an innocent man, are you? Are you?" And he pauses for, he's like, "You're right, I'm not." And he jabs him with the dart. So he gets sent back up the line, but there's no body to return to. So that's a clever way to get his man and help an innocent man at the same time. And this is, again, that big thought where the mind is suppressed, where Whistler's ancestors like, "Where am I? What's happened? How did I get here?" So clearly that consciousness is suppressed and is gone for all intents and purposes. And again, just Jack is now stuck in 1984, but he's got Lena. He has to adapt to a new world, and the people in the future could yank him back at any time if they wanted to, presumably.
Yeah.
And there's a line we're not really going to go into Trancers 1.5 or City of Los Angeles, but it's kind of a relevant point to make. So when McNulty comes back, he arrives in the body of one of his ancestors.
Yeah.
And it's a little girl who's like 11 years old, which that girl is precocious and funny and actually did an astounding job.
I'm so happy they kept her for the second one. Like I forgot about that, and it was so fun for her to come back at that beginning of the second one, and then be like, "Oh my God, they used the little girl." Because that's one thing that is also funny about Trancers is there's a bit of space between that first one and that second one.
Yeah, and she's age appropriate. So even in Trancers 1.5, which I want to say was filmed in 1986 or so, all the original cast came back. So its basic plot summary is Jack had put away someone in the 23rd century. Art LaFleur's character of McNulty is on the orders of the council moving this person because he says a line like, "Well, we're going to take this person out of maximum security and we're going to move them to somewhere in the asteroid belt." Again, explaining space travel and how incarceration works in the future. And I got thinking, an asteroid would be about one of the most secure places to put someone because they're not going anywhere. So this person has been held. It's this assassin who's a woman, and they're like, she's so dangerous, but in the last 5 years, she's only ever said 2 words. And McNulty's like, "And what's that?" "Jack Death." So eventually this woman escapes, sends herself down the line by threatening the same scientist from the first movie, Thelma Thompson, to send her down the line. And McNulty says, well, if she wants Jack, there's only one place she can go, 1986. And Jack and Lena are having an argument. They're about to break up. And eventually shenanigans happen. The assassin arrives in the body of one of his ancestors. McNulty and Jack are hanging out, having a drink, which is a little weird watching a 40, 50-year-old man have a drink with a 13-year-old girl.
This is true, yeah.
And eventually, they both get sent back up the line. The fight alternates between two time periods, and they arrive back in the future. And McNulty's trapped in a Murphy bed at one point because the little girl gets knocked into a Murphy bed, and the bad guy puts her into the wall. So they come back up the line into the future, and this assassin is trying to kill Jack in the council's, I guess, lab near the security thing or whatever. And he defeats this assassin with hair gel.
Yep.
And he says a line from the first movie, remember, dry hairs for squids. And so eventually he gets sent back down the line to 1986, and he says to Ruth, that's it, Ruthie. He's like, hey, Ruthie, when you mix up this batch of the chemical, I need you to send me 3 hours before McNulty arrives. And she's like, yeah, sure. Why? He's like, I got something that I want to fix, which again, small line could be taken as, oh, okay, I just want to fix problems with Lena.
Yeah.
But that means the chemical can be hyper specific as to when you go back. So again, it's little lore building things like that I love. But when we get the Trancers 2, that don't fucking matter anymore.
No, it's a bit out the window. And the one thing also that I'll say about the switch from Trancers 1 to Trancers 2 is we go from a PG-13 to an R. And kids, let me tell you, it may be, it may not be a hard R, but it's an R because we are in Squib City. Squib City, baby. Squib City from here to 2 and 3, or from 2 to 3. It just ups the stakes. I mean, hell, we'll get to it, but I mean, K and B effects is mentioned in 3 as the ones that are doing the effects, so you know that like something's gonna happen if K and B's attached to it.
Oh yeah. So my history with Trancers 2, I found this on the video shelf of that same video store by my high school, and this is after I become a Full Moon head hardcore. So around this time, I'd rented Bad Channels, I'd rented Subspecies, I think Dr. Mordred I'd seen Puppet Master 1, 2, 3. And the cool thing, why I was after all these movies, besides liking the content, Charlie Band was doing DVD special features before there were special features. And he did something at the end of every movie, like once the credits had rolled, if you stuck around, he would do something called the Full Moon Video Zone.
Oh,
and it was usually about a 15 to 30 minute conversation, behind the scenes, interview, bloopers, gag reel, and just all the things that were coming up from Full Moon in one very casually put together package. And it was just such a fun thing to me where I was like, I need to see more of this. That's how I found out about Bad Channels, which is one of my favorite Full Moon movies we're going to have to talk about at some point on this show.
Oh, we can do a Full Moon hodgepodge of those titles. There's a few that I really like, but yeah, you're probably more into it a little bit more than I am. But yeah, Bad Channels I'd be down for.
But yeah, it was just such a thing because at that time, I had no idea what special features were because DVD didn't get really popular until about 97, 98. Like my first ever DVD set, my first ever DVD I ever owned, which Dave, you'll love this, was the Nightmare on Elm Street box set. That big brown one with new Nightmare Freddy on the cover.
And the Nightmare Encyclopedia, because what do kids love? They love to wander a haunted house digitally to get bonus content that is not listed anywhere else. That's what kids want.
Honestly, that's what sold me on it. And I remember
it's a cool concept. I'm not gonna lie.
And I remember at the time, Christmas 1998, I think, is when I got this thing, or 97 something. Anyway, I'm with my first serious girlfriend, Ashley. And we're sitting up in my room, like just a couple days after Christmas. My parents would let us have sleepovers because what are you gonna do? But I remember sitting there with her, and we were mapping out the haunted house. And the reason that's why I was so into movies, because like I didn't know these behind the scene things. I had never browsed the IMDb message boards. I had never gotten into that. So being able to see from filmmakers themselves, from stars themselves, I started to know writers, I started to know directors. And if it wasn't for the Full Moon Video Zone, I don't think I'd be as into owning physical media of my favorite movies, because I want those special features. I want to know these things, because like one of the things I'm always insanely jealous about, and this comes from the music world. I had a friend of mine growing up named Sam, and she knew everything about her favorite bands. She knew this encyclopedic knowledge. And then I would have friends in high school who would know everything about movies, and I always was very jealous of like, how did you acquire this knowledge? Because at that time in my small hometown, it was books, or maybe you read something on the internet. So I wanted to find my way to speed run my way to that knowledge, and Video Zone special features and DVD special features would be my gateway to learning about stuff. And while I've kind of cooled off on some of that stuff, if there's ever a documentary that I review on Twig, when it comes to reviewing a Blu-ray disc or something that we get from Paramount, Warner Brothers, Sony, whoever, 9 times out of 10, my recommendations to should you buy this, the movie, you're either going to love it or hate it. Is it worth owning? Will always come down the special features. If there's a lot, you should buy it. If there's not, then just stream it or rent it.
Well, and the way that I look at special features, especially, you mentioned the thing about how Video Zone was kind of your gateway. I was a trailer whore. I remember the days of Video Detective, which was a trailer hub that was like in the early days of I'm trying to think, like IMDb and whatnot. I think I went through like Infinite Coolness was a website that had a bunch of like clips and trailers and whatnot too. And I mean, I just remember that was kind of my gateway, especially into looking into what else was available through any movie I had. Then you were saying the thing about bonus materials. I love a loaded disc, absolutely. But the one thing that I will say sometimes is sometimes the bonus content ain't worth putting out.
No, because typically, again, this comes from my background in media. You can put together something known as a EPK, which is an electronic press kit, which is usually here's like 30 seconds let's use Trancers as an example. Okay, you have 7 minutes. Here's a minute and a half with Charlie. Here's 2 minutes with Tim. Here's a couple of minutes with Helen Hunt. Let's talk with the writers for about 45 seconds. Here's some behind the scenes B-roll. Here's your minute 30 trailer with epic trailer guy doing the voice.
Your EPK is typically gonna not exceed 5 minutes usually.
Typically, yeah. Like you might get the odd one, but not too often. And that's when you look at it here. Hot tip, kids, if you're looking at the back of a special features thing, if they list the times, if it's less than 7 minutes or 5 usually, that's an EPK. That's what gets sent to us in the press typically to decide, are we going to cover this movie or not, or it's something we can pull clips from, or we can pull quotes. It's meant to make our lives easier. Not always, but more often than not. And if a disc is full of nothing but EPK stuff, I think it's really friggin' lazy. But if anything is over 10 minutes, that's a little bit more effort. The sweet spot for me for special features between 15 and 30. But when you do a full-length documentary, that's a buy it for me. Almost every single time. And with Trancers, when they started to do the video zone, actually one of my favorite video zones is Trancers 2. Because there's a blooper with Tim Thomerson, and he's just goofing around with like Megan Ward, who plays Alice Stillwell, who we'll get to. And he's talking with her. He's like, and he just does this really goofy voice, and it's his delivery of it that just, it slays me to this very day. He's like, they've got Lena, man. It's a real bummer. And it's just something about Tim Thomerson's comedy, because he was a comedic actor. I mean, he came from a comedy background. He's been in movies like Uncommon Valor, I think, with Reb Brown of all people. And it's just,
I think Link's House is in Uncommon Valor. Jesus.
Yeah, like he's done some really intense shit, but he's a really funny guy. And Trancers 2, he gets a lot friggin' funnier. And they really start to play that up in some of the further sequels. But number 2, especially, like at one point he singes a pair of Trancers at like a garden place, and 2 of the extras that he runs into are like Charlie Band's mother and ex-mother-in-law. And he's like, don't worry, ladies, they're biodegradable, because when Trancers die, they're like the Borg from Star Trek. And what I mean by that is they just disintegrate into nothing and leave these burned scorch marks on the ground. But it's line delivery. And Tim Thomerson's a lot more comfortable in Trancers 2. He's kind of made Jack Death his own. And I would wonder how much of that was ad-libbed, where he's just like, okay, here's what I want you to do, Tim, but make it you. Yeah. And just as the series goes on, but especially in parts 2 and 3, Tim really becomes this character. And I think Jack Death is one of the most underappreciated B-movie heroes, and definitely one of the most recognizable in fiction. And I really think, when I think back on some of my favorite male heroes, Jack Death is definitely in my top 10.
Jack Death, Tim Thomerson's portrayal of Jack Death is something that you would not get if the 80s action star had not been a thing. Because that's what he really starts to lean into as we get into Trancers 2 in 91 and then Trancers 3, is Jack Death becomes like a Cobra, like a freaking Arnold Schwarzenegger type, like a Stallone type. He is this persona that you come to like almost know and, I mean, not almost, that you come to know and love, because it's just, that is Jack Death. And like we said earlier, he's not perfect. He's not the absolute sharpest Trancer hunter or anything along those lines, but he gets the job done, even if he gets captured, even if his friends get captured, even if the bad guy claims a couple more victims. No matter what, at the end of the day, Jack Death is going to have some form of victory. And I mean, and that's what becomes fun about the Trancer series, is just seeing the shit that he gets into. And 2 especially, like, I'm flashing back to just that scene where they break out of the barn and they're being dragged in that like trough. Him, Lena, and oh goddamn, what's his wife's Alice? And they're shooting and they're just being dragged in this slow trough, but they're gunning down everyone. You're not gonna get that from any other movie. That to where you're gonna be like, oh well, that just doesn't work. No, it's like in Trancers 2, if they're being drugged by a tractor in a trough and shooting people, going so fucking slow, it's so humorously slow. You're gonna be like, you know what? No, this is fine. Like this is fine. This is Trancers 2. What else more could I want? So I mean, Jack Death is solely responsible for the fact that these movies are so much fun. If he wasn't there, I don't think they would. I don't think. Specifically, if Tim Thomerson wasn't there, I don't think these would be as much fun as they are, which I know I said, but like that is one of the absolute things that I think really people, if they haven't seen the Trancer series, just need to give a chance to. If you are an 80s action fan, this is right up the wheelhouse.
Oh yeah. Now, one of the things I love about Trancers 2, and then we'll get into the plot, they advance the technology lore a little further in this, and this is where the rules start to fall apart. But they also get a little bit more interesting. So in the future, it's determined that they need to go back and get Jack. But they can't. And you might be saying, well, why? They can just use that serum. So literally in the first couple moments of the film, Art LaFleur and Thelma Thompson, McNulty and Ruthie, they pull out Jack's body and they say, well, we can't bring him back using the serum. And McNulty's like, why? Because his body is calcified, which when you think back to City of Los Angeles, his body has been in use, quote unquote, or in storage for 2 years, and the body hasn't atrophied, the muscles haven't degenerated, the body's still fresh. But 6 years being in quote unquote stasis, the body's not viable anymore, and they can't just pull the plug and kill him for whatever reason. They're keeping the body there. But I'm thinking, but now they have this new piece of tech called the TCL chamber, which allows a person from the future to go back down the line to actually move around and do stuff. But they can send the chamber back, but they might need to recover it. It's so weird. But one of the things they do with this is they mentioned they sent an agent back to 1992 to take care of the aforementioned Whistler's brother. He has a brother now?
Dr. Wardo.
Dr. Wardo. What a name. And there's a plot point where Jack says to Alice, he meets her, and he's like, hey, Alice, remember me? I'm your husband. And she's like, what? He's like, yeah. But the plot with her is she can't go back to the future. And the reason that is she has to use the TCL chamber to come back, or that's how she can't, or for some reason, she was sent back into the body of a mental patient who was an ancestor of hers, but she can't go back up the line with the serum. And you're thinking, well, why not? If she was sent back fairly recently, her body should be intact. Well, there's a problem with that. Just before she got sent back, the day before the first Trancers movie happens, Whistler killed her and murdered her in the future. So if she goes back up the line with what happened to Whistler, there's no body to return home to.
Yes.
So it introduces time paradox. I don't think they really thought this through, because if that person, that mental patient, which as far as I interpret it, that woman can't be any older than, say, 2025. She would have to have had a kid, because if she brings that body back to the future, how does that lineage continue?
Yeah. Well, and that's, again, that goes back into the whole thing we were saying earlier about there are rules in these movies that frequently change, and you just kind of have to roll with the punches. What I think I love most about Trancers 2 lore especially is it becomes this giant family living in this mansion fighting off the Trancers at one point. And also dealing with an alcoholism story with Hap Ashby's character. There's so much emotion in this one, with the fact that Jack has been married to Lena for 6 years at this point. Alice comes back and he's smooching on her. And of course, she's like, Jack, you son of a bitch. There's so much family drama in this. You want me to go ahead and get into the pertinent deets?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, go for it. Hit me up.
All right, so we're talking about Trancers 2 from 1991, 1 hour and 28 minutes, rated R. The IMDb synopsis says, 6 years after a time cop returns home from battling future alien zombies, his settled life is turned upside down when a mad scientist creates more. This is once again directed by Charles Band. Our writers on this time are Charlie Band as well as Jack Canson. Canson is a name that you would really only know if you are a Full Moon head, because he gets his start in 89 with Nowhere to Run, goes to Body Chemistry, Trancers 2, Subspecies, Body Chemistry 2, Berlin Conspiracy, Seed People, Bad Channels, Robot Wars, Mandroid, Invisible, The Chronicles of Benjamin Knight, and Point of Seduction, Body Chemistry 3. So he was a writer on a lot of the early Full Moon stuff. And we do have Bilson and DeMaio credited on, or not uncredited on this, but I think it's probably just characters. So with Full Moon movies, it's hard to really tell, though, where exactly all the pieces came from and what Charlie just didn't take credit for. Yeah, I said it.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to Trancers 2, this one is shot by Adolfo Bartoli. And ironically enough, we actually talked about Mr. Bartoli on an episode that is out by the time this episode's dropped, which is Enrique's birthday episode. We talked about Puppet Master 4 on Do You Even Movie. And Bartoli is the guy that directed that shot Puppet Master 4. But just to give you a tasting, Birdman, he is also a gentleman who was the director of photography on such films as give me a second here. Gotta get back to cinematographer. He did a lot of camera and electrical stuff. Let's see. So he does not only Trancers 2, he also does The Pit and the Pendulum, Beyond the Door 3, Puppet Master 3, Netherworld, Demonic Toys, Seed People, Bad Channels, Dr. Mordred, Trancers 3, Robot Wars, Prehysteria, Remote, Dollman vs. Demonic Toys, Puppet Master 4, Trancers 4, Oblivion, Lurking Fear, Puppet Master 5, Trancers 5. So he basically shoots all the Trancers movies. I think, I don't know if he does 6 or not, but he shoots all of them from this point on. And I think you'll agree with me that 2 is absolutely where it finds its style that it keeps through like the next 2 movies especially.
Yeah, like I would say Trancers 1 is a B movie very distinctly 80s. Trancers 2 is a very distinctly 90s B movie with how it looks, how it's got its gags, the dialogue. And it's a very 90s-esque plot because it's how the Trancers are formed is from a drug that's being grown and
by
Dr.
Green World. What a freaking, like, I don't know if it's a Soylent Green like reference or whatnot, but like the idea that they are growing Trancers at a place called Green World, could it be more on the nose?
Yeah, like when I saw it, like obviously in the 1990s, environmentalism was the hot new thing. They're like you're in the era of Captain Planet, recycling, do the right thing, sort your paper and your plastics and your metals and all that shit. It's a very 90s-esque plot.
Yeah.
And this movie it oozes that 90s thing, but not to me, there are 2 separate eras of 90s era B movie. Before 1995, I'll say it's either environmentalism, it's terrorism, usually from the Middle East, drugs, or it's like, I'm trying to think maybe what else. Russians.
I mean, prostitution's a big one in the 80s.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big one.
And then 95 on, the direct-to-video market changes, and you get Seagal, whose star is starting to fade a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Those movies start to change. Jean-Claude Van Damme's starting to do direct-to-video stuff a little bit, because I think his last big hit was maybe Maximum Risk, maybe The One. So his star is starting to fade. So those direct-to-video action movies are starting to change, or you're seeing B movie stars like Howie Long getting a chance to do stuff in movies, and they're more ridiculous, but they're not as rooted in fantasy, power fantasy pre-1995. And after that, B movies are more, I'd say, grounded, but the action with like the karate and the gunfights get a little bit more intense, but the plots are a lot more serious, more grim in some ways.
Well, and we haven't gotten into the full like full bore tilt of like, everything has to blow up, everybody has to die. Like that's going to come mid 90s, which actually kind of plays into the next Trancers movie a bit. I think it gets it gets absolutely bombastic in the next one. But Trancers 2 retains a little more of its humor, especially in a sense of humor, especially in this one, because you've got the whole concept of the fact that like Jack Death now has 2 women living with him in the same roof, but he has only 2 days to spend with one before there's a chance he's never going to see her again, which is his wife, his first wife before Lena. And you have Lena, who's adjusting with the fact that she's had 6 years of no Trancers bullshit, and now that's back. Hap Ashby is fighting alcoholism because he's been off the wagon, or he's been on the wagon, off the wagon or on the wagon. I can't remember the term. On. He's been on the wagon for like since the last movie. And one thing I don't know if you read the trivia or know this or not. Do you know that he was actually drunk a lot of the time on Trancers, and Thomerson
I did actually
physical with him?
I thought that was such a clever way to quote unquote get in character.
Yeah. The fact that Thomerson had to get physical with him, I'm just like, yeah, I can see that because I bet Thomerson doesn't have too much of a temper from what I've heard, or too much of patience and a temper from what I've heard. Because it's reported that he punched Robin Williams in the face one night because Robin Williams stole one of his jokes.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah, like